very strange family. My family is a lot older. My grandma, she would have been born in 1906. My dad would have been 55 when he had me. So yes, we are a very old family. But the reason I say that is I never got to meet my grandma. But the concept of what they living on a small farm, everything that I heard from them or heard from my aunts, my uncles, my dad, was this thing about my grandma. And my grandma would always, they said, basically be able to use her toes as fingers. She could pick up rocks and she would throw them at the kids, like when they'd mess with her. And she would, the big story was that she would take a rock and pick a rock up between her two toes and be able to throw it over our barn. We had a large barn. This is not like some little shed. This is a full hay barn with a hay mow and everything. So the concept of that was kind of came to me early of like your feet should be able to be used a little bit different than what we use them now. So in 2011, 2012, when I kind of started messing a little bit more in my rehab and what I was doing with my athletes, I started getting into this. And this is something, what I will tell you is this presentation that I had that I've done before, I completely deleted last night at 11 o'clock because I didn't like it, because I wanted it to not be science. So if you want the science, if you want the background, if you want the understanding of it, if you want some of the research, I can give you the research. I can tell you that stuff. I can tell you where to go to find the research on proprioception, balance, and how that correlates to prevention of ACL injuries and things like that. If you want that, I'll give it to you. But what I want to talk through is kind of what I've seen, what I've done, and how I look at stuff. So the objectives, obviously with the BOC, we are required to have objectives. These are our learning objectives. You will see them on our eval that I know everybody thinks when I send it out to y'all that I'm really making things up. So I apologize how long it is, but I'm trying to make sure we're in the good graces of the BOC. The other thing I will comment on, and I did want to say this first, was I do apologize, as most of you have noticed, and I have had a couple comments about this, with regard to the original schedule that was put out. Jason Magoni was obviously on this, in this time slot, in the diagnostic ultrasound. And I've had some people ask, why aren't we having the diagnostic ultrasound talk? And that is because TCU has went and decided that they're going to try to win a national championship. And since he is the team physician for them, you know, he was kind of required to be there. So, conflicts of interest. I am on full-time staff with Methodist Sports Medicine. I have no financial gain from this talk, but I do have a strength and conditioning business that I do on the side, primarily based around rodeo athletes, but that's not, you will see a few of the balance toe things that I do with some of my rodeo guys. So, again, why I started worrying about the feet. We kind of talked about it. We talked about my grandma, the things that I learned there. We talked about what I started to develop when I was in the weightlifting world and doing more of that stuff. What I will tell you is then in 2015, after, you know, I've been doing a lot of different rehab with my athletes. Foot rehab, different stuff like that, developing things around feet. Now what I'm seeing is I'm seeing these massive changes in what they're doing and how they're returning to play and how their ability to, and their pain, like post-ACL rehabs, that they're not having that anterior knee pain because we're focusing a lot on feet. We're focusing a lot on posterior chain. We're focusing a lot on the obvious rehab that we're doing, but we base it around a foundation, and that foundation is the foot. So then I met my wife. At the time was not my wife, but I met my wife. My wife is a bit of a swimming athlete. She was a national level synchronized swimmer, went to college and was a synchronized swimmer. So I have now taken a bunch of pictures of her feet. So apparently there is a feet fetish thing that you can, so we are not into that. Just because I have lots of pictures of feet on here does not mean I did not understand that. So I met my wife. She is in synchronized swimming, and I did not realize what synchronized swimming does to your feet. The amount of utilization of your feet to create lift, to pull you out of the water, her ability to utilize her toes and her feet was amazing. And if you've worked with synchronized swimmers, and if you get them out of the water and you have them sit there, they can sit there and basically AB duct, AD duct. This is 2 nights ago. So 2 nights ago, this is a big change from when she was swimming, and she stopped swimming in probably 2004, 2005. So the realistics of it is her still capabilities here for somebody that has to stuff her feet in shoes now is still great in comparison to what a lot of people can do. That was one of the things that I noticed that I was like, this is interesting. In something that she is a non-weight bearing, not based in the ground athlete, she has a lot of foot control, a lot of ground control, a lot of great toe control, and ability to move and utilize her toes in an athletic sense. So then, thanks to my wife again, she took me to the ballet. And I primarily I love the ballet. I love Cirque du Soleil. I love things like that. And the reason I love it is it shows pure athleticism. Pure athleticism from things that we don't typically think. We think about football, we think about baseball, we think about all these regular sports, right? And development of athleticism. We don't think about things like ballet and athleticism. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, these guys are not training vertical. I can tell you they're not training vertical. You can look at their body builds and tell they're not training vertical. They're not built like our sprinters. I mean, they do have a large posterior chain when you look at a ballet, when you look at somebody that's in the ballet and somebody that's in dance. They have a pretty good sized posterior chain. But their legs are pretty small, typically. But the amount of explosion and ground force that they can create by this position here and basically using that posterior chain and using their feet and driving out showed me, what can they do with their feet? What are they developing out of their feet? And as you start to see them, this is where it's going to get weird. Taking my shoes off. All right. As you start to see them and they walk on their toes as they're getting to their dancing positions. I know everybody wanted to see me do ballet today, but as they get into these positions, they're up, they're on their toes, they're in these big positions, and they have great foot control. A great ability to control themselves in the air on their feet. And that was another thing where it pointed out to me that we need to find our contact with the ground. We need to stop worrying about so much butt. I understand. I love making my athletes develop their posterior chain and develop their butt. But I want to develop their foot too. So, when you look at athletes, the reason I have the athletes that I have up there are because most of the athletes that are up there are not what you would think as being like they didn't come from like a super background of being a phenomenal athlete. Starting from the right, Andre DeGrasse, when he came to junior college, he was at the junior college that I was at in Coffeyville, and he was a basketball player. The concept of how he got to come and run track was because somebody said, "Hey, Andre, why don't you come out and run on the track a little bit, do some splits with us? It's good for basketball." He came out and started doing it, and they found out that he was really fast, like really fast. Part of the thing that he had done that with was because he always talked about doing calf exercises and doing stuff like that because he was worried about his calf size. He had phenomenal control of his feet. That was one thing I noticed with him. The other thing about it is like you can see when he runs, he drives directly out of his great toe. The other thing that I see here is actually another Canadian. I didn't even think of that. Wow, brain. Sorry, Christian Covington. Christian Covington up there, the football player. Defensive lineman. Played with us at Rice when I was at Rice. And was one of these guys that was a little undersized. He's not somebody that you would just expect, oh, he's going to the NFL, right? He's really good. He was really good for Conference USA when we were there. But he's this kid that can develop a lot of power. You see these kids with the flat feet that are just extremely explosive, right? They're the fastest kid on your team or something, and they're just completely flat feet. the thing that I'm seeing out of some of these kids is they have more ability to develop a spring. Okay, that development of that spring is because when he gets up and he actually drives out of his toe, he creates a spring with the intrinsic muscles of his foot. And when you would get him on his toes, his arch would be perfect. It's there, it's massive. And it's like, there's a great arch. It's just because he's walking around flat-footed. But he always drove out of his big toe. Then you see, going over here, you go to Stetson right, toes forward. The thing that I looked at there, this is a non-contact, non-ground-based contact sport, bull riding, right? So bull riding, everybody thinks toes out. You know, we sit here, we stick our spurs in them, and we hold on. We use our hamstrings, we use our adductors. Use everything. If your toes are forward and you're using your feet to control your animal over, or your body over a bull, you are now able to develop a better position and use more musculature, because you can engage your posterior chain, you can use adductors, you can use your quads, you can knee up, you can get into a lot of different positions like that. And if your toes are out, you can't do that. All you got is hamstring, maybe a little adductor. Same thing in the saddle bronc rider. This is a picture you'll never see in rodeo athletes, is because nobody wants to see them kneed up. Knee up is a safety position. A safety position in rodeo and saddle bronc riding is basically, this is where I'm in a bad spot or I'm not prepared to set my feet and have this nice, pretty feet out, toe out position. But what it shows me is, where's his feet pointing? His feet are pointing straight forward, down, and he's also in basically a perfect squat on top of a horse. He's in a controlled athletic position. Stetson is as well. So why have we changed? What we've changed is we've changed our shoe. We're not climbing trees, running after saber-tooth tigers anymore. We're trying to fit in whatever that thing is on the right. Cowboy boots. I do the same thing. I stick my feet in cowboy boots all the time for rodeo and stuff like that. So when you start talking about toes, or when you start talking about foot and you talk about the toes forward and toes out, like, there's a lot of different concepts behind this. There's a lot of arguments. There's a lot of podcasts. Everybody can say their opinion. What I will tell you is that, one, when you look at a toe out position, it's not as athletic as a toe forward position. It does not look like you can maintain athleticism as good with a toe out position as you can with a toe out. Kenny, can I borrow you? He's like, what am I doing? So I want to borrow Kenny real quick. Can you come up here real fast? The reason I want to do that is because, one, I've not told him that I'm going to do this. And two, I know he works out. I know he trains. I know he squats pretty heavy. And by doing that, I want to utilize somebody that's strong. He's got strength, but I want to show an example of what I'm talking about. Toes straight ahead, toes forward. Can you take your boots off? Because I know that those will make you slip a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to test his toe forward position, and I'm going to test his toe out position. I don't know. How do you squat, Kenny? Do you squat toe out a little bit? Toe out a little bit? So he's going to be strong in that toe out position. I'll tell you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk up to him, and I'm going to have him get into kind of what I would call a general athletic position, right? Your whatever you want to call normal athletic position, but I want him to get into a squat. Now I kind of want him to put his feet like he's going to squat for me. So a little bit wider maybe, put those toes out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to directly come here and I'm going to pull on his leg. Okay? So you know now what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull on his leg and I'm going to see what happens. He's going to get a little more athletic position. I'm going to come here and I'm just going to pull out on 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay? Now, tighten your toes up a little forward. Good. Now, squatting position again. Thanks, Jeremy. Squatting position again, same thing. He moved on that first one. 1, 2, 3. Turn it out again. Good. Squatting position again. 1, 2, 3. See the little shift in his hips. Toes straight ahead. 1, 2, 3. Bigger shift. There's a much bigger shift. I don't know if you guys could see it, but I could feel it. How could you feel it? Did you feel it a little bit? There's a much bigger shift in his hip. Sorry. There's a much bigger shift in his hip. You're good. In his hip when you have toe out versus when you have toe forward. And that's the biggest concept that I see there is it's a more athletic base, toe forward. I'm not going to say that everybody has to squat toe forward, toe out, whatever. There's a lot of reasons why people squat, how they squat. But I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about developing force and why we're going to try to create this for a rehab protocol. So how do we evaluate that? Just kind of like what we talked about there. So first thing, look at their toe and ankle range of motion. How much do we actually measure range of motion anymore? We don't pull out the goniometer, but look at it and compare. What does one side look to another? Obviously, there's people that are injured. Obviously, there are these outliers that have limited range of motion, but that's not the norm. The outlier in my wife, in her hips, the reason that she was really good at synchronized swimming is she has a hip dysplasia, which basically is an undercovering of that hip bone, of that femoral head, and because of that, she's able to, not now, but back then, she was able to put her legs up on 2x4s and sit down on the ground. So that hyperextension, that massive flexibility, that's what made her good at what she did. She's an outlier. She's not the norm. The norm is a normal range of motion. So start looking at ranges of motion. When you think about range of motion, one of the biggest people I think about, especially ankle range of motion, is Michael Jordan. Because if you think about the amount of dorsiflexion that he would get into when he would stop and turn, that's how he would turn on a dime so quickly. Part of the reason that we've stopped having great range of motion is that neural activation to our feet, okay? That neural activation, that firing of, hey, we need to move here, has stopped. Like, we're not doing that. We're not utilizing our toes. We're not utilizing our feet anymore. Your foot needs to be the same as your fingers. You should be able to say, I want to pick this toe up. I want to pick this toe up. I want to pick my big toe up. I want to abduct. I want to adduct. When you look at range of motion, you should have a passive and an active range of motion components. What is that amount of loading? What is that amount of range of motion that you have there? When you sit there and you look at that, my range of motion pulling my toe up, it's a lot different. It's a lot greater, right? What is that loading? What's that range of motion for that kid that's super explosive? And what he's able to do in terms of drive out of the ground. The next thing that you start going into is you go into the foot tripod. So this is something that there's a lot of people that talk about it. There's a few people, there's a lot of people that talk about the foot tripod. One of the groups that I've utilized a lot is Cal Dietz. He does triphasic training in terms of athletic development more so. So he's a strength and conditioning coach at the University of Minnesota, works with hockey. A lot of foot there, right? Most people don't think about foot, but a lot of foot. So they talk a little bit about the foot tripod, probably where I've done a lot of my research in it. But there's a lot of people, when you look up foot tripod, you can find a ton of things on the foot tripod. What the foot tripod basically is it is the points between the ball of your foot, some people call it your medial ball, versus your lateral ball of your foot. Not as many people there, that's more of like, I feel like in the chiropractor world and some of the massage therapy worlds and things like that, but not a true anatomical location, but going out, following basically that transverse arch and then coming down to your heel. So when you look at the triangle of the foot and development of that triangle of the foot and how that foot is created, if you are farther lateral, what are you doing? You are probably supinating. If you are farther medial, if you look at your athlete and they've got this big old drop here, they are pronating. Their triangle is not in a good position. They are not covering a good area. Problems with the triangle, you're not going to produce as much power. When you don't produce as much power, the body's going to cheat to produce more power. So what does that mean? It probably means injury. So we're going to go into a little more of that here in a minute. But the next thing is locating the proper tripod. So when you try to locate the tripod, what you need to do, you can utilize something if you have to hold on to it, but take your athlete, have them get into a single leg position, pick their toes up, and then try to squat. The reason we're doing this is we're utilizing the tripod. If you utilize that tripod to get down into that squat position, you'll feel your transverse arch. You will feel arches in your foot that you've never felt before. I promise, if you start getting down into it. You'll feel that position with those toes up, because those toes aren't sitting there trying to grab into the ground and hold the ground and balance you, which now your whole foot structure is based on your toes versus being based on the arches of your foot. So your toes are built for explosion. For you to drive, your arches are based on that balance. That balance component is there in the arch. It doesn't matter if you aren't a heel striker, which we know in distance runners, right? Not great to, any type of runners, sprinters, runners, you're not supposed to heel strike. You're not supposed to get this massive heel strike. You're supposed to get an arch strike. That's forming a greater foot, a stronger foot, developing that arch. So once we look into the foot, basically the big thing here is the footer levers. The muscles of the footer levers, just like in your bicep. So you pull your bicep, you're creating a lever here, right? But you have all these tiny levers in the feet that are developing that explosion and developing that power. And you have to consider that comparison of those intrinsic muscles. One of the things there is you can see in that red, the muscle, that the development, and think about that as a spring. So if I'm sitting here and I'm holding a super band, right, the big looped bands, and I have it around both arms and I start to go here, my amount of force that I'm going to generate going back isn't as great as if I put them both here, right? So if I can create more tension throughout that spring, I'm going to create better force. Basically, this is talking about, the concept here is talking about a short foot, or creating an arched foot, creating greater strength to that arch. And as that arch is lost and or is not loaded, the energy potential dissipates. And then this follows. What happens when the foot doesn't function? When the foot doesn't function, your arch starts to collapse. When your arch starts to collapse, you get tibial rotation. Leads to ankle sprains, leads to ankle issues, leads to bone spurs, leads to all these things, right? If it goes untreated for long enough, and you're just weak enough anyway, it leads to knee valgus. It leads to squatting with your toes out, because you're trying to make up that you can't squat with your knees out over your feet. So I'm going to open up my toes. I'm going to squat with my feet out, and I'm going to see, my knees aren't caving. BS, they're not caving. They're caving there. They should be here if they're over the second foot, if they're over that second toe. Then you're going to start getting femoral internal rotation, cam lesions, pincer lesions, big old labral tears, things like that start popping up. The minute that your hip starts getting involved. How many people that have had a hip injury in an athlete that then started to have like QL symptoms? Probably most of them, especially if it's a substantial injury. If it's a substantial hip injury, it's going to involve the QL. And as it involves the QL, then it creates pelvic dysfunction, SI dysfunction, something that Shawn Scott talked about last year. And then posterior chain has to elongate, because you now turn into an anterior rotation position. And as you develop anterior rotation and get here, your now hamstrings are elongated. So now you're at potential for all these random injuries. Hamstring strains, back injury, why does my back hurt, my SI dysfunction, my this, my that. It starts into a chain. So the great toe is the foundation of the posterior chain, and I know we're going here, so I'm going to start rolling through this a little quicker. The big thing here is, this is how I evaluate, and I just added this. Thankfully, Megan had me come and take some pictures of one of her runners here, and I still had them. So we kind of ran through this a little bit. We didn't do the triangle, and we didn't do stuff like that, but like this is what I looked for. This is what we look for when we look at a foot. Let's watch them. Let's look at them from the back. Let's look at them from the front. Let's see, the back looks drastically different than the front will. You can't just sit there and take one side. You have to look at both. You can see that she pronates a little bit. You can see, you can see a little bit of kind of change in musculature side to side. When you look at the video of her standing, I like to have them stand in balance. I like to see, like, that is her standing on one leg. Look at how much movement's there. That's not normal. That's not a good triangle. Like, she doesn't have a good balanced triangle. Like, she cannot do that. The 2 feet together. Look at their soles of their, not their sole. Look at the soles in their shoes. Look at their sole. Kind of creepy. Pull out their insole. Look at the insole. Don't just look at the shoe. Look at the insole. Look at something like that, because that'll also show you a big wear pattern, especially on the flip side of their insole. Look at them squat. See what they do? I know, some of it's painful. Again, I know Megan just walked in. Thank you, Megan, for letting me come and take pictures of one of your athletes. Don't fix them. Don't try to fix this. Because if you try to fix it, it gets in their brain, and then they change how they do it, and you want to do a good evaluation on it. Just video it, and then develop what you're going to do. Same thing on the front side. You watch them squat. You see what they do. You see, I mean, the foot's just not strong here. The base is not strong. When you look at a bad foundation on a house, like if you build a multi-million-dollar house on sand, it's not going to do much. Like, you can be a college athlete. I get them to stand on their toes. One thing I do a lot now is I also do a lot of the toe pickup so that I can see about the base. I have them jump. I have them land. I have them do all sorts of things like that. Yes, I know the knee valgus was really bad. That's from the base up, right? Yeah, her posterior chain's weak, but her foot's weak. So then we get her to run. Get her to run on the treadmill. I love to use my iPhone because I can slow it down. I'm sure Samsung's whatever can utilize it too. But I can slow it down. I can actually see what's happening. I can see what the foot's doing. It's pronating, it's supinating, it's doing whatever. I can also look at then the side view, do the same thing. You do the same thing. Slow it down. Slow your athlete down. For a distance runner, it's really funny how much she is a heel striker. So, here's the things that how do we fix it? Real quick. These are just a few things that I've come up with. Some of them I've stole. I'll tell you which ones I've stole. I'll tell you who to go to. Toe walk. The toe walk I love. One of the first things I do with a toe walk, though, is I tell them this. You brush your teeth twice a day, right? You brush your teeth for 2 minutes. I want you to start standing on your toes for 2 minutes, brushing your teeth. So while you're sitting brushing your teeth, you're standing on your toes. You're sitting there in that toe-up position. Sometimes I will also then get them to get on the ball of their foot and pick their toes up. Brush your teeth in the morning like this. I'm going to pick my toes up. I'm going to sit there, walk, move around. It's okay, because it's hard to stand just like this for 2 minutes. That's really hard, but it'll start to develop the intrinsic muscles of your feet. When you first start talking about this stuff, you have to tell them that their feet are going to be sore and that they need to probably roll out with a lacrosse ball or a golf ball. Go into a toe walk. Pretty simple, not real hard. Then the next thing you can do, go into the triangle base toe walk. So when you think about a triangle base toe walk, you think about picking your toes up, walking on a triangle base. Think about the base of the triangle where the lower portion is. You're not putting your foot on the heel. Again, nothing mind-blowing, just using your feet. Ankle loading. This is a Cal Dietz thing. I will tell you that right now. This is not a great one. I don't get in as much dorsiflexion as I need to, But I really love this. You're doing this for an isometric. You get into this position, you hold on one foot, and you're driving that toe. You're getting that hold position on those plates. Really focusing on trying to drive into your foot. That's ankle loading 1. He has like ankle loading up to 7, where he loads them, does different things like that. I do too. Again, I'm looking at this as a rehab component, right? Do I recommend doing some of the other stuff? Absolutely. But the realistics of it is, for this talk, we need to go simple. Ankle loading 2 here, basically load up the great toe, load up the foot, isometric hold. Start at 20 seconds, develop your timeout. Keep going, try to get up to 60 seconds. 2x4 walk and turns. These are hard, man. And this was a while ago too, but these are hard. That's something I do with bull riders a lot. I make them walk on their toes. Get on a set of 2x4s. How many 2x4s can you probably find around? I use 2x4s for so much rehab. It's not even funny, especially then you push them on a turf field. But developing core, developing a little proprioception, stuff like that. Heel elevated split squat. So when you think, I obviously call it a split squat, a little bit more strength and conditioning side, but lunge. When you teach somebody to lunge, you can heel elevate it. So when you think about heel elevating, all you have to do is be on your toes. I know it's a little hard to see, but I'm on my toes. My front foot is on its toes. My back foot is on its toes. You can goblet load this. You can do it without weight. You can do it with, honestly, anything. Notice, again, I do a little bit wider stance. I don't do like a foot in front of foot. The reason I don't do that is I try to stay away from hip impingement type stuff with a lot of my athletes because they're rodeo athletes. But when you start doing that, toe elevated. Put them in a toe elevated. Put them in a toe elevated isometric hold at the bottom. It will kill their feet, will kill their soul. Back to the soul. Same thing. There's just a different variation here that I'm utilizing. I'm utilizing with a bar, with a safety squat bar. You can use it with a barbell. You can use it with dumbbells. You can use it with anything. It's just I have the ability there to utilize the safety squat. I love the safety squat for rehab if it's available. Now heel elevated squat, very same thing. Again, utilizing 2x4s. You could stand on 2x4s. Directional, you get a little bit of medial lateral component that you're dealing with there. You also can belt load it. I like belt loading it because it changes the center of gravity. You can do different things like that. Next one is same thing with a safety squat. And then again, there's really not a ton of difference with them. You can do this again with a barbell as well. And then you can also throw a 2x under it. I do like, if you're squatting somebody with weight on a 2x, use a 2x6 at least, maybe a 2x8, because they will flip. They'll start to flip on you. So especially if you start to get heavyweight, this is obviously 25s on each side, so it's not heavyweight. But that concept right there, once you start getting back there and you start getting a little bit of a shifting, it'll flip on you, and then you'll potentially get into an injury. So, what do I want from my athletes? When I first start talking to my athletes, I talk to them about their feet. I start talking to them about training their feet. I talk to them about standing on their toe. I talk to them about the triangle. I talk to them about utilizing their great toe. I want you to feel as you push off from the ground that you push off out of your great toe. I don't want you to push out of like whatever this is, pushing out of the side of your foot. I don't want you pushing off of like the outside of your foot. I want you to push out of your great toe. And when you start pushing out of your great toe, and then I go ahead and I add in the posterior chain stuff that I'm going to put in, such as the lateral banded sidewalks, the bridging, the things of that sort, that's when I'm actually going to get a lot of engagement in my posterior chain. And as they walk and they step, they're going to feel their butt fire for the first time, probably ever. The first time that they feel that they're walking and they're like, oh, I was walking down the hall and I felt my butt. It's weird. It's weird for your athlete to come tell you that. But because they've used their toe, they feel their butt more. They feel utilizing, and that's when you finally get it through their brain of like, you see this? when we do those wall drills or when we do driving drills, that this is what we're really trying to do is use posterior chain. So here's a few things that you can go and utilize. Just a couple. Triphasic, love Cal Dietz. He's a freaking smart dude. He's a strength coach. You won't get any CUs out of it, but he's really smart. The Foot Collective is really cool. They do a lot of stuff, like a little bit more of the voodoo finger, toe stuff, things like that. But they have some of the different types of shoes. Power Athlete Academy, we had Tex McQuilkin here before. He's talked about a few things with us. They have a course on the feet. I will tell you, take Cal Dietz's. Not saying I don't like Power Athlete. Cal's is, I think, $38. Tex and Power Athletes is like $250. And I'm sure it's great. I haven't taken it myself. But I know those guys, and I'm happy to tell you that they do put out really good stuff. So if you've got somebody paying for you, absolutely go do it. Go take it. And then there's a really good journal, and it's talking at Rethinking the Evolution of the Human Foot. One last thing that I will comment on, because I know that I do get this question a lot in regards to shear and like the knee being out over the toe stuff in some of these exercises when that heel is elevated. So knee over toe guy, whatever. This is a big new thing. I've had a million conversations about this, right? We started worrying about shear. We started worrying about all these random things with knee over toe back in the day. Here's the last thing I'll say about that. Don't worry about knee over toe shearing if it's not problematic to your athlete. The reason I say that is for them to get out and sprint. Where is their knee? It's going to be over their toe. For them to be in this position here, their knee will be over their toe. So athletics, load requires knee over toe. So the knee over toe guy is great and all. He's telling us something that we've known for a long time, but he's just making it more mainstream. So I get a lot of people that look at my video and look at my stuff like that and are like, well, your knee's out over your toe. It's okay. You're loading, you're preventing shear. You're creating a little bit of shear, but you're creating strength. So, and I know we're a little behind because I talk way too long, and so I'll take questions anytime after this. So, Dr. Schmidt.
Thank you, Shawn. God, he's got ugly feet. Yeah.